Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Dear ladies, after discussing John Keats's Ode to the West Wind, we will start discussing another poem by John Keats, but now it is different. Before discussing the second poem, we are supposed to know the difference between Keats and the other romantics of the second generation. You know that Keats is one of the second generation romantics, including Shelley, Keats, and Byron. But he differed from the other two romantics in many points. The most important point in which Keats differs from these two romantics is that he was so much interested in in poetry for its sake. He was neither a rebel nor a utopian dreamer like Shelley, for example. He was endowed with a purely artistic nature. Keats took up a position of almost complete detachment concerning all the movements and rebels and conflicts of his time. He was not interested neither in political reform nor in social reform, and he was not interested in what is happening around him to be included in his poetry. In fact, he never considered that poetry should be a vehicle that articulate some issues of philosophy or in religion or in social and political aspects or theories or upheavals. He differed from Byron's stormy spirit of antagonism to the existing order, or his rebel against the social issues of his time. Nor he was interested in Shelley's humanitarian enthusiasm and zeal and passion for reforming the world, as we have seen in his in the poem we have already discussed, Ode to the West Wind. Now, he considered that poetry is only beauty. It is an incarnation. It is an embodiment of beauty. And that's why it should not carry any other issues but beauty. Now and because he is searching for beauty, he never considered the aspect of poetry as a promising something for the future, not like Shelley. Shelley was so much interested in what is happening in the future. He is anticipating some salvation in the future, as we have seen in his West Wind. While Keats was seeking for an imaginative escape of his reality, maybe because he has suffered a lot of, let's say, a lot of disasters and suffering in his life. He was not a believer in what is happening in the future to be the best or better than his present. In fact, he delved deep into the past, and that's why he started, or he tried to escape his reality, which was hard, cold, and prosaic for him, into the past, like in Greek mythology, like in medieval romances, as he articulates in his poems as Isabella and La Belle Dame Sans Merci, which we are going to study today. And in his treatment of nature, he was passionate for the sensuous beauty, the beauty that is in front of your eyes, that we can sense through our five senses. Okay? Now we have to know what was the intention of the poet when he wrote this poem, La Belle Sans Merci, La Belle Dame Sans Merci. Now, in this poem, the intention of the writer was explained by readers and by critics differently. Many of the readers saw that this poem was written by Keats to reflect or to show the people his own personal rebellion against the pains of love. And in his letters and some of his poems, he revealed that he did experience these pains of love, as well as the pleasures. And he explained in these letters and poems why he resented the suffering in love, and particularly losing freedom, when a lover loses his freedom and becomes under the control of the beloved. And we know that he is he is an adherent to the idea of liberty, and that's why he asks in the previous poem, he asked the west wind to take him with it, the nightingale, to take him with him, to fly with the nightingale in order to feel such a liberty. So he was against losing liberty and freedom that comes with the falling in love, with the idea of falling in love, or with the situation in which a man falls in love. But in fact, other critics emphasize the idea that he was very objective in this ballad, because he uses a ballad, and the ballad is usually an objective form, and it may be it is better to read this poem as purely a story of love and no more. Now, they justify this opinion that this poem is not about his beloved, is that he had written already about his beloved in many other poems and letters. And that's why they are not with the idea that this... Now, to summarize the poem La Belle Dame sans de Merci, here there is a speaker. The speaker is asking a knight. Of course, neither the speaker nor the knight are identified. And he asks a knight who seems to him very afflicted, and he seems to him very hurt and feels pain. So he asks what happened to him. The knight is very pale and he is obviously dying. And because the speaker is describing him as having a fading rose on his cheek that is withering, that is falling, and its falling is very fast. The knight answers that he met a beautiful lady, just like a fairy child, who looked at him with love. She articulated, or she suggested to him, that she is in love with him. In fact, later she confesses this love so openly. When he said, and they are together, and he puts her, or he sets her on his horse, and when he sets her on his horse, she leads him now. She leads him to her cave. And there, in that cave, she starts to sing to him, and she lulls him to sleep. In this sleep, he has a nightmarish dream, just like a nightmare. He sees that there are kings, princes, and warriors who are just like him, as he is now, of course. They were all pale, and these warriors and princes and kings told him that he had been enslaved by this they were controlled by this beautiful lady, but they call her as a cruel lady. And he was terrified by their faces and by their sayings, so he was awake. When he awoke, the lady was gone, and he was lying on a cold hillside. In fact, the reference to the knight in this poem is a reference to strength. The knight is supposed to be a representative of strength, and he is supposed to be a symbol for bravery. But in spite of having strength and bravery in this war of love, although he is a warrior and he is a knight and he is supposed to have won many battles, in this battle of love he is conquered, he is controlled, and he is suffering the agony of love. This is the whole summary of the poem. Now, concerning the poem, the poet uses the ballad. He uses the ballad, this form or this genre of medieval and old genre. It was all revived by many romantic poets, and Keats was keen to use this ballad stanza, which is a quatrain in iambic pentameter, but with some trimeter lines. When he shortens the tetrameter. When he shortens this tetrameter to trimeter, he wants to make this ballad a slow movement. He wants to show that the ballad appears as deliberate and it has a slow movement. And it's going to be very pleasing to the ear. And we know that he is so keen in the sensuous diagram that he uses in his poem, or in his poems, all his poetry, of course. And Keats here uses a number of stylistic characteristics of the ballad. He employs the characteristics of the ballad as simplicity of language, repetition, and the absence of details. And he gives this supernatural flavor to his ballad, because it was already, the old ballads and the medieval ballads were full of supernatural elements. And it is known for many students in literature that John Keats, in every poem, tends to compare two opposite things. For instance, in The Nightingale, he compares the natural beauty and the physical beauty, mortality and immortality, and many other issues. He is always using opposite things to be compared in his poems. In this poem, he compares between beauty and pain. Beauty that includes pain. As for the poet's attitude, what is his attitude? Of course, he starts his poem in a very gloomy, or he sets a very gloomy atmosphere, and he ends his poem with this gloomy atmosphere. From the very beginning, the poet does not identify the questioner, neither the lady nor the knight, nor the speaker himself, because he wants his readers to imagine the whole situation. He wants them to use their imagination. They imagine the lady, La Belle Dame, sans mercy. This beautiful lady, La Belle Dame, it means a beautiful lady. Sans mercy, who does not have mercy, without pity. Mercy here is pity, mercy. Okay, so this beautiful lady is a femme fatale. Femme fatale, or femme fatale, in fact, femme fatale, it means the fatal feminine, feminine, the fatal, deadly, female. Femme fatale means the fatal female. And usually this concept of femme fatale is always revolving on a circular figure who attracts lovers only to destroy them by her supernatural powers. Of course, in the modern age, the concept differed slightly, but it is all in all referring to the female who is fatal, who is destructive. But in this poem, the femme fatale is a character who destroys by her supernatural powers. She destroys only because it is part of her nature to destroy, not because she has some intention or a matter of revenge, no, because she is in nature a destructive character. Keats could have found patterns of his fairy child in folk mythology. Of course, the fairy child is a beautiful child, of course, or the female who has the posture of a fairy child. He found such examples in folk mythology, classical literature, Renaissance poetry, and of course the medieval ballad. And he puts his own touches that he creates this woman who is completely beautiful, and she's erotically attractive, fascinating, but she is a deadly figure. As for the title of the poem, ladies, the story is including both pleasure and pain at the same time. The title of the poem is taken from a narrative, a very long narrative ballad written by the French poet Alain Chartier. And this ballad was entitled with the same title that Keats uses. He has borrowed the title of this ballad to his poem. And this ballad, the title is explaining the idea of the poem, that there is a beautiful lady who is without mercy. The beautiful lady without mercy. So there is a combination between pain and the pleasure at the same time. Now in stanza 1, which starts with oh, what can ail thee, knight at arms, alone and palely loitering? The siege has withered from the lake, and no birds sing. Now in this poem, in this stanza, the poem starts with an analysis of a knight at arms, a knight, a brave knight, a brave warrior who appears very ill. And the poet directly addresses him and inquires him. He asks him about the reason behind his pain and loneliness. The knight feels tired and he is very pale. He is just like a plant of siege, which is decayed, which is at the edge of its fading away, of its death, and it is at the edge of a lake. And he is very pale because something is clearly wrong with the night. The last line of the first stanza, and no birds sing, in fact it draws a very depressing and gloomy atmosphere. No birds sing means that there is this is the conclusion that the knight's heart is delving into sadness. There are no rejoicing of birds. The birds sing nothing, so they are so quiet because the night is very sad. The speaker says that the siege or marsh plants, these are marsh plants which are growing around the edges of rivers or lakes. These marsh plants have all died from around the lake, and no birds sing. So we are guessing that this is autumn. We can guess that because there are no birds sing, the birds are singing away, they are flying away, they are traveling. So it is autumn. And autumn, of course, is usually announcing winter, death, since all birds have immigrated or migrated and the plants have withered, they are dying. So the presence of the night, here of course the use of the knight at arms is an image. This image is a reminder of fairy tales of knights and ladies in towers. And now this is the response that Keats is intended to show his readers, that the readers will imagine the fairy tales of the medieval age. In these two stanzas, in stanza 2 and 3, the poet, or the speaker in fact, is continuing questioning the knight, and again he says knight at arms, referring to his bravery, referring to his strength, and this bravery, I mean the idea of having a knight is what makes the speaker asks. He is supposed to be a very strong person. So what had made him so pale and weak? So he continues in asking the knight about what is bothering him, and he compares between the sadness of the night and the completion of the universe. He says why the knight is looking so pale and exhausted, while it is supposed that the general problems of the universe have been solved. The squirrel's garnery is full and the harvest is done. These two lines about the garnery and the harvest, they expose that the natural sequence of things is done. The squirrels are supposed to have finished filling their garnery, their storage for food, because of the coming of winter, and the crops have been already harvested, so everything is okay. Why the knight appears away from the natural course of things? Why he appears different from the natural course of matters? So if everything is all right, so what is the thing that bothers the knight? He continues questioning. Of course, the knight does not answer immediately. Because he does not answer immediately, the speaker completes questioning and repeating the question, and this repetition of the question is deliberately done by the writer or the poet, because he wants the readers to imagine what type of suffering that or pain or agony that the knight is going through. So that's why he does not reveal, the poet does not reveal the reason behind the knight's mental disorder immediately. He continues for 3 stanzas to ask. Again, in stanza 3, the readers are going to imagine the sorrowful situation of the knight. This stanza reveals how Keats uses similes and comparing two things in order to elaborate on the problem, on the pain, on the harm that the knight is going through. He asks about the lily on the knight's brow, suggesting that the knight's face is pale like a lily, and his forehead is sweaty with anguish and with fever, so he's obviously sick. The last lines of the stanza describe how the healthy color is rapidly fading fast. Whether this th is the present or singular s. So it is fading rapidly from the knight's cheeks. Again, it is all questions. Only in this stanza, in stanza 4, the writer, the speaker insistence on answering the questions drives the knight to answer all of a sudden. He answers the unnamed speaker's question. So now the I, when he says I met a lady, it is a reference to the knight. Immediately, all of a sudden, the knight answers the question, or the questions in fact of the speaker, and he says I met a lady in the meadows. And then he starts describing the beauty, the fascinating beauty of that lady whom he has met. Through the description of the lady, the readers can realize the ability of John Keats in analyzing this imagery in such a beautiful way, in such a lucid way that helps every reader to imagine. The analysis of this imagery presented by Keats helps his readers to imagine the beauty of that lady. The knight says that the lady was very beautiful, a fairy-like lady. she has long hair and she was graceful and she has wild eyes, but this wildness of her eyes is not strictly described, or it is definitely described. In fact, the word wild does not give a very clear meaning whether it is wild because it is attractive or something else. Then in stanzas 5 and 6, these two stanzas are according to the description of the sexual intercourses between the knight and the lady. They make love, and the whole situation is erotic, and the poet is referring to the sexual intercourses through the reference to the flowers and their scents in stanza 5, and later his reference to his horse is adding to this course or intercourse. The lady in these two stanzas start to express her emotions freely, first of all through her eyes, the wild eyes, while she was looking to the knight. And the knight is expressing these looks or wild eyes as a confession of love. Many critics say that if we look at the poem subjectively, we can say that these two stanzas are the reference to Keats's own story with Fanny Brown, his beloved, his former beloved, who had exiled him and left him all alone. And maybe he is here expressing his own experience of sexual intercourses with Brown, with Fanny Brown, and it is the garlands and bracelets that Keats himself had made for his beloved. While other critics, as we said, they argue that the whole poem is an objective ballad about nature, about love, and it does not concern itself with Keats's beloved. Now in stanza 7 and 8, the knight continues talking about his relation to the lady, giving a suggestion. The poet here is giving a suggestion that the lady is not an earthly lady, a worldly lady. She's either supernatural or heavenly. The knight says that the fairy tale found him tasty roots, honey, and manna. Manna is al-manna was-salwa, to eat, in order to eat and enjoy life with her, of relish sweet, of pure sweet. Manna is a biblical allusion here because this food, al-man, was given to the Jewish, or was mentioned in the Jewish scriptures, saying that the Israelites ate manna when they were wandering around the desert after Moses, and when after Moses have freed them from slavery in Egypt. This is on one hand, and on the other hand, on the one hand, manna is supposed to be the food from heaven. Here there is the reference that manna is a food from heaven, so this word makes the fairy lady seem supernatural, if not divine. On the other hand, you know that manna is given to Jews, to the Israelites after being freed by Moses. So here there is a reference to liberty and freedom, that manna is a reference to their freedom. But in fact, alternatively enough, or contrastively, he is freed in for the idea of love, but in fact he was enslaved by this beautiful lady. This allusion becomes even more deep or deeper when it is associated with the honey wild that the fairy lady had fed the knight, because also the Israelites were trying to find the promised land, the land of a promise, which flows with milk, or of which rivers are flowing with milk and honey. So there is another biblical reference. the fairy lady tells the knight that she loves him. And she says this in a very strange language, that it seems that the knight had understood. Her language was strange, but he could understood it. How could he understand it? We cannot say, because either because of his too much love for her, he understands her language, or maybe it is a suggestion made by the knight himself to himself, that he is hearing words of love, that he wants to hear that she loves him. So he translated, or he understood her language as being saying that she loves him. Or maybe he was so much enchanted by her magic, by her supernatural powers, that enabled him to understand the language, which is strange. In the 8th stanza, he continues talking about his journey with this lady. She took him to the cave, to her cave, which was filled with elfins. Elfins means the genies, the small genies. And she took him to that cave filled with genies, and as they were back to her cave, to her place, she starts to weep and cry. She sighs loudly. Maybe she is crying because of too much love, as he perceives it, because the reason after her crying is not very clear. So maybe because of her so much love, or maybe because of so much emotions overwhelming her, it is left to the reader's imagination. So in order to relieve her, he kisses her weepy eyes for 4 times, and we don't know why 4 times. We don't know why 4 times, because usually in fairy tales we have the number, the magical number is 3 times, not 4. And again he refers to her eyes with saying wild eyes. Of course, the reference to her eyes as being wild also adds more to the strangeness, to the strange language, to the cave filled with elves. All these elements are emphasizing that the whole atmosphere is supernatural, something that is beyond our understanding, something that is beyond reality. So the whole matter is an escapist atmosphere. Now in stanza 9 and 10, in these stanzas there is some dramatization of the events. Each one of these stanzas is completing the other and dependent on each other. Suddenly, after he, of course, because the lady was singing him a lullaby, she causes him asleep, and as the night falls asleep, there is some change in the whole in the sequence of events. He falls asleep and sees a nightmare. In this nightmare, he sees kings and princes and warriors who all had fallen in love with the La Belle Dame Sans Mercy, with this beautiful lady without mercy. And they were talking to him, to the night, telling him that they were her captives, they were her enslaved lovers. Okay, so immediately he knows from the nightmare that she had cheated them all, and he was terrified by the idea that he is awakened by this terror. And immediately here in these two stanzas, there is this link between, or comparison in fact, between falling in love, which is followed immediately by pain. So this is the comparison between love and pain in this stanza, which is very clear. Here there is this idea, the idea that usually with beauty there is melancholy. There is always some sadness that is dwelling with beauty. And this idea is not only in this poem. Usually we have seen in Out to the West Wind, and if you read more of Keats's poems, you will find this idea or theme dwelling through all his poetry. The best part of the poem is when the knight feels himself the luckiest person, but his pleasures are not everlasting. The moment he is intoxicated with this happiness of having the lady in his hands or in his arms, and he feels her love, the second moment he feels that his pleasure is not an everlasting pleasure. So if we want to define the whole meaning of these stanzas, it is very sufficient, it is very enough to maintain the idea that sorrow and pain and suffering can never be separated from love. In fact, the speaker now, who is not the speaker, the original, the knight is going to emphasize again on the word pale 3 times in 2 lines. This procession of pale men, the kings, the princes, and the fighters or knights, could be an allusion to the 4th horseman of the apocalypse that gets described in the book of Revelation in the Christian Bible. Again, there is an allusion, a biblical allusion of the story of 4 horsemen. Maybe this is why he referred to the kisses of 4 kisses. 4 horsemen in the Bible are revealed in the book of Revelation in the Bible, and the 4th horseman was death, and he rides on a pale horse. So here, with the 4th kiss, the speaker, the knight, falls asleep. Immediately after this 4th kiss, he falls asleep. And when he falls asleep, he is going to see these pale men. When he refers to the word pale, there is a biblical allusion referring to the horsemen, to the 4 horsemen presented in stories in the Bible, and the 4th one, with reference to the 4th kiss, of course, the 4th one was the horseman of death, or the 4th horseman was death in the story, in the biblical allusion. And that death is riding on a pale horse. So here the idea is that with the most intoxicated moment of kissing, the 4th kiss of the lady, the knight is, with this kiss, he is relating his emotions to death. So with this intoxication, there is death after. And that is why the writer refers to this biblical allusion. He explains his dream to the speaker. I mean, the knight is explaining his dream by saying that all the warriors that he saw in his dream were pale, and in the gloom, or at night, in the dusk, during the dusk. So there is this fall of the day, as it is the fall of love. Now, he says that all what he can understand from them is or from their side, is their lips. Their lips was explaining their situation. He says that their mouth were starved lips, They are hungry looking. They are starving for looking to that lady because they have already fell in love with her or fallen in love with her, and they lost her altogether. And their mouths were all open as they were crying to him. They were warning him. The writer uses here the word glow instead of saying, for example, night or dusk or darkness, because he wants to give this impression of the word gloom. So glowing here, or having gloom, it means in darkness, as if the writer wants to remind us of the gloom atmosphere in which the knight found himself. The knight wakes up from the dream, alone and cold on the sides of the cold hill. After this warning, he wakes up. He wants to escape this dream. Because he discovers that he had become another victim of love, like all these former lovers of this beautiful lady without mercy. Because now he perceives that he is another victim, because he was left by the beautiful lady all alone on the hill, and he gets to know that he is now returning to his real life, which is the gloomy life he is living. In fact, the whole situation is ironical, because in fact it is completely the opposite. The reality is that when the knight was not in love with the lady, and in his imagination he got this love. Later he gets back to his reality, which is without love. So the writer here is reversing imagination and reality. The knight falls in love with a lady and spends moments of sleep through a dream, and he comes to know that everything was temporary and mortal. The dream of the knight was in fact reality, and the reality, which he was horrified by it, as he says, was his dream. His nightmare. The nightmare that he saw was his reality, in fact, and he escaped this to the dream of love and getting the favors of love and enjoying love. But in fact, he reversed this because he was trying to escape this reality, which he was horrified by it. He was dreaming when he falls in love with the beautiful girl, and his nightmare is the actual reality when he wakes up from his dream. Keats has compared the world of imagination with the world of reality. Everything is concluded in the last stanza of the poem when he says, when the knight says, "This is why I sojourn here. This is why I am remaining here, all alone, and suffering and feeling pain." Okay, he repeats, "Though the siege is withered from the lake and no birds sing." The poet starts the poem in despair when he says, "and no birds sing," and he ends in despair. However, there is a development of thought in the middle stanzas of the poem, but all these thoughts were in imagination. These beautiful thoughts are all imagination. The knight repeats the unnamed speaker's words from the here the knight himself is now repeating the speaker's words. The poem ends almost exactly the same stanza, so there is no escape from reality. The first gloomy atmosphere, which is the real life, is repeated at the end of it. We may dream, we may imagine, we may go through our dreams away from reality, but all in all these dreams are going to be mortal and fading away, just like the dream, not the nightmare, the dream of love with which the knight was intoxicated and felt so hopeful, so happy. The themes of the poems are concerned with many contrastive and compared ideas like imagination versus reality, sorrows versus love or beauty versus pain, expectation versus reality, beauty versus melancholy, immortal versus the immortal. And we are going to explain this in detail. Dear ladies, as for the themes of this poem, as I said, there is imagination versus reality, sorrow versus love, expectation also versus reality. Expectation is related to imagination, and beauty and melancholy, mortal and the immortal. All these themes are revolving on the situation, around the situation of the speaker, or not the speaker, sorry, the knight, who is the other speaker in the poem, of course. And it is revolving also around Keats's intention, that he is comparing between a dichotomy of imagination and reality, as he believes that in imagination, it is only in imagination man can find an escape from his pains and sorrows, and he can go through happiness. Maybe the whole idea is that because of his melancholy, he is looking at imagination as the only escape. Of course, the imagination here is also a reference to poetry itself, because these words are from his own, the writer's own imagination. Going through sorrows and love, Keats has always related his poems to the idea that since there is love, there is sorrow and pain. Since there is beauty, there is melancholy. Love cannot be gained without feeling its sorrows. Even if you are so much satisfied with love, yet there is sorrow and melancholy. As for expectations and reality, the expectations also are also related to imagination. What man expects from his universe is beauty, love, happiness, but these expectations are going to be doomed by the disastrous or by the melancholic reality we are living in. Mortal and immortal. The mortal is the physical world, is reality. The immortal, the mortal, yes, it is the physical world. And even in imagination, when things are related to mortal things, to physical love, to making sex, and all these points, it is going to be mortal. It is not going to be everlasting. What is what is immortal? Sorry, ladies. What is immortal is the pain that the speaker, the writer, and the knight feel. It is the immortal thing that they can never escape. And this immortal pain is documented by the writer in his poem. Until now, we can read it, we can feel it. So the whole poem is going to be immortal because of its pains, not because of the favors that the knight had got through his relation with the beautiful lady. Now the main themes, also there are main themes in the poem, which is dealing with the supernatural. Through the description and through the setting of the poem, through the setting of the poem and the description of the lady, Keats gives so many supernatural elements, and he he deals with the beautiful lady as a supernatural figure. Even when she deals, first of all, he describes her as a fairy child, and then the food that she gives to the knight is all related to fairy tales, and the power that she has are so much great that she is enchanting the knight without asking her. He follows her just like a child. And all these supernatural elements, of course, because they are supernatural, they overwhelm the knight. But at the end, they leave him all alone and destroyed, because these supernatural elements are destructive. Love and seduction. The tension between erotic love and seduction and ideal chivalrous partnership are approached in this poem. There is a comparison between the type of love which is erotic, which is physical, which is related to seduction, is compared to the good nature of the knight, because he is a chivalrous, a brave partnership. He is an ideal knight. He is a knight, and he has all the nobility of a knight. But he was destroyed. Why? Because he was compared, he was related himself to this type of love, which is not an elevated type of love. It is based on seduction. And because of this, he got himself to his destruction. And that's why the knight is described as having this nobility. The lily on his brow, it is fading, it is a pale lily. And this lily is signifying what? His loyalty, his courtly tradition of nobility, his courtly love, his nature as a person who is following his own traditions of being a nobleman, even in love. So that lily was fading, and that's why it falls away with this seduction. However, as the color quickly drains from his cheek, as he loses his red color of cheeks, he becomes so prone, so ready, vulnerable to the woman's charms and seduction. With his defenses lowered, because he is now under her control, so he never defends himself against her. So he loses his defenses of morality, of nobility, and he follows his desires. Here, love, because it is related to his desires, it is immediately associated with sex and fantasy. Because here, when he relates his love to his desires, maybe it is because of the charming supernatural power of the woman that makes him under her control. Maybe because he is trying to challenge this type of love, because he is a nobleman. But because of the supernatural element of the lady, she could put him under her magical spell. Yes. Now there is the question about this tension. Was the tension, or was his falling in love because he desired to follow this type of unidentified or undefined, unrestrained type of love, or it happened because of her supernatural charm? This question is left to the readers. The femme fatale or femme fatale character, this is a very prominent and overwhelming theme among romantic poets, because you know what, this idea and even the love and seduction, these two ideas are part of the poets, the romantic poets, let's say, rebel against anything related to order. And that is why we see these two ideas always overwhelming their poetry, I mean the Romantics' poetry. Yes, we said that Keats is not interested in the rebellious nature of Romantics, but here we see that it is part of their inventive character that they go through these ideas. Why? Because women at that time are usually referred to as being very nice creatures, and they are very tender creatures, to the extent that no one would look to a woman as a bad figure. And that's why he refers to women as a femme fatale only in imagination, because he cannot give this idea of women as a sort of seduction and sexual desires. Maybe his rebel against his own love to, or the character of his beloved, Miss Brown, maybe created this love to his beloved, and such a type of seduction, such pain that he felt because of this love. He wanted to give let's say, a reaction to this erotic love that had ended between him and his beloved. So he presents this idea of the femme fatale, which was, let's say, popular among the Romantics. And the poem depicts this idea, but he tries to depict this idea through imagination. I mean, not in real life, because he immediately describes her as a fairy child. Okay, ladies, and this such type of femme fatale is going to be a destructive character, and such women are going to lead their lovers to deterioration and losing themselves and losing their entity. Now, dear, the last point we are going to discuss in this poem is the technique, the literary techniques or literary elements, including symbols, imagery, and metaphors. The writer from the very beginning is going to start, or starts with flower imagery and symbolism. Here the flowers are going to have two ways, let's say, functions. The flowers as an image and the flower as a symbol at the same time. Most of the flower imagery in the poem has a symbolic weight. We usually associate the flowers and springtime with springtime, while here, and with love, of course, and with life, but here in this case, as these flowers are related to La Belle Dame Sans Mercy, these flowers can be a kind of tricky, and they are related not to springtime. On the contrary, they are related to autumn, because the writer starts with the word withering flowers, I mean withering lilies. Okay, and here, of course, the most prominent lines that show the flowers. In line 9, we have the lilies are often related to death, and the lily on the knight's forehead does not present him as let's say, a self-contained character. On the contrary, they are articulating his fall, they are articulating his deterioration, because they are withering on his brow. In line 11 also, the roses are often associated with love, but this rose of love is fading, withering. It sounds like a clear metaphor for the end of this romantic relationship. It is used here not only as a symbol, not only as an image, but it is a metaphor for the fall or the end of this romantic relationship with the beautiful lady. Number 2, the images of seasons and the cycles of the seasons. The poem begins and ends with the image of autumn. that the whole poem seems to have taken place during autumn or even early winter, because he says he found himself on cold hills. I mean, when the night wakes up, he finds himself on cold hills, so it is an announcement for winter. Of course, symbolically enough, it is an announcement of death. But the sequence with the fairy lady seems to be during spring or summer. While this interval, when the knight was in his relationship with the lady, it was indicating that the season in which he was living with the lady, it was spring or summer. It was a beautiful season, full with the flowers, lilies, and fairies, and they could go into the cave. Otherwise, the cave would, unless it was summer or spring, the cave would have been very cold. So they will not be able to enter into the cave and have their sleep. Now, the image of paleness here, using the colors, usually paleness is a description of autumn, and the withering plants around the lake are also pale. They are withered. And the landscape and the people in that landscape are all colorless, and that's why the knight could not recognize from these people but their mouths. He could not configure their facial expressions, their facial colors. They were all pale. The color is pale, and he could not configure the color of these people. But it is surprising when you totally go up how many times the poet uses the word pale or synonyms for it. Here, the presentation of the word itself, pale, or synonyms for this word, is emphasizing that everything is gloomy, and that's why he emphasizes the word pale and pale. Now, another image is the image of dreams and the sleep. The whole poem is a dreamy sequence, or a fantasy, or imaginative, and with the fairy ladies and the elfin grots. But there is an explicit dream sequence described by the knight at the close of the poem, when he says, when he says, when he brings up questions about consciousness and the nature of reality and the other things that kept us up at night. With this, ladies, the description, the explanation of the poem ends. I hope that my explanation would be very helpful to you in understanding the poem and in understanding Keats' literary techniques and thematic techniques, or thematic presentation of his poem. Thank you very much for listening, and hope you are all well and sound, safe and sound.